All right, good afternoon, everybody. So just a quick note on housekeeping. I would ask that everybody please silence their phones as we're getting ready to start the event.
Hello, I'm Congressman Mark Takano, ranking member of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs and author of the Honoring Our Pact Act, landmark legislation signed by President Joe Biden last August that extends long overdue care to more than 3.5 million veterans living with the effects of toxic exposure. It is an honor to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9981 on July 26, 1948, by President Harry S. Truman, desegregating the United States Armed Forces. Executive Order 9981 stated that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. Executive Order 9981 and the Women's Armed Services Integration Act, signed 1 month earlier, moved the United States Armed Forces towards greater access and equality for Black service members. I'd like to thank the Department of Labor's Veterans Employment and Training Service for conducting research on the Black veteran employment experience. This research seeks to document evidence on Black veterans' experience transitioning from military to civilian employment while identifying gaps in existing research that prevent the current state and needs of Black veterans from being fully understood and addressed. This is important work that acknowledges how far we have come and identifies opportunities for improvement in our service to Black veterans in establishing equity for all. Thank you, vets, for the work that you do to enable all veterans, service members, and military spouses to reach their full potential in the workplace.
Welcome. My name is Julian Purdy, and I am the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy for the Veterans Employment and Training Service, also known as VETS. And it brings me great joy to welcome you all to the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces, a Black Veterans and Good Jobs event. This event is a special collaboration between the Department of Labor's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Accessibility team and VETS. And we could not have done this event without partnering with the support of Acting Secretary Julie Su, Alicia Black-Hackett, and her team, as well as my colleagues at VETS. And it is also now my great pleasure to introduce Acting Secretary Julie Su. And while Julie Su is going to come to the stage, we are first going to hear some words from Congressman Mike Levin on a video.
Good afternoon. I'm Congressman Mike Levin, representing California's 49th Congressional District. It's an honor to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces with you today. President Truman's Executive Order 9981 paved the way for Black service members to be able to fight for our country with dignity and respect, regardless of the color of their skin. The celebration of this historic milestone gives us the opportunity to reflect on how far we've come and how much more we must do to expand opportunities for Black service members, veterans, and their families. I'd like to thank the Department of Labor, Veterans Employment and Training Service for conducting valuable research on Black veteran employment. This research provides insight into Black veterans' transition from military to civilian employment, while identifying the obstacles that may prevent Black veterans from reaching their full potential so we can address them. As the ranking member of the House Veterans Affairs Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity, I'm focused on passing legislation to improve veterans' access to employment training, affordable housing, and benefits that improve their lives. A special thanks to the Department of Labor for your partnership in this work and for all you do to help veterans succeed in the workplace. Hope you all have a successful roundtable and a great anniversary celebration.
Thank you so much. And Julian, thank you for your incredible leadership at VETS and on so many of the initiatives since we've all been here at the Department of Labor. Thank you to our entire VETS team, our Veterans Employment and Training Service team. Our Assistant Secretary, James Rodriguez, is also in the house with other members of VETS, and also Alacia Black-Hackett, the first ever DEIA Chief Officer at the Department of Labor, for all of the work in putting this together. It's such an honor to be with you all and to welcome you here to the Cesar Chavez Auditorium at the Department of Labor. Today, as you've already heard, we are celebrating 75 years since President Truman signed an executive order abolishing segregation in the armed forces and ordering full integration of all branches of the United States military. Today, I also want to acknowledge that we have the first ever African-American Secretary of Defense in Lloyd Austin. And today, we also honor the tremendous dedication, tenacity, and patriotism of Black American service personnel, without whom the armed services could not have accomplished this historic order. So I don't need to tell anyone who's here today that throughout our history, Black Americans have fought tirelessly to defend our freedoms. From the very founding of this country to the Civil War, from the trenches of 2 world wars to Korea and Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. But for too long, Black Americans stepped forward to protect our country even when our country didn't offer full protections to them. Many made the ultimate sacrifice to defend all of our rights and our freedoms abroad, even when they were refused access to the full protections and spectrum of rights and freedoms back at home. And the 1.2 million Black veterans who served their country during World War II came home to find themselves excluded from the GI Bill, and for many, the doors shut to home ownership. In the midst of it all, these brave women and men never stopped fighting for the founding ideals upon which our nation was founded: liberty, equality, fairness. So today I'm thinking about people like Major Oleta Crane. In 1943, during World War II, she became one of 3 Black women to enter officer training for the U.S. Army. During training, Major Crane and her company faced constant discrimination. They were barred from the barracks and forced to sleep in other rooms. They were told that their voices were too high and their steps were too short after their marching drills. And they were even given the runaround at the segregated pool when they needed to train. Somehow the pool schedules always seemed to change when they needed to use the pool. At some point, Major Crane said, enough is enough. And at great risk to her own career, she demanded fair treatment, and she successfully persuaded her commander to end the pool's segregation. Now, she fought and won that battle 5 years before President Truman signed that executive order. So today we celebrate a whole bunch of trailblazers who, at no small sacrifice, made the world we celebrate today possible. And after the war ended, Major Crane was the only Black woman officer retained by the military. Now, in 1963, she retired from active duty. And the next year, I am so proud to say, Oleta Crane joined our very own Department of Labor, where she spent the rest of her career. Eventually, Oleta became a regional administrator for the Women's Bureau, where she continued her fight to empower women, especially Black women, and to advocate for their employment rights. Her incredible story continues to inform and inspire us here today. And so it's fitting that the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor is today working to ensure equitable access to the good jobs that are being created all across the economy, and including making sure that all people, all talent in all communities are welcome in the jobs that are building our infrastructure and all of our new industries. So we owe Major Oleta Crane and all veterans a deep debt of gratitude. And that's not enough. We still need to make sure that our veterans and service members get equitable access to opportunities when they hang up their uniform. And that means renewing our commitment to serving our veterans as well as they have served us. Here at the Department of Labor, we take that commitment very personally. So last year, in our hiring here at DOL, we hired 667 veterans to our team. That was nearly 33% of all of our hires that year. Today, veterans make up nearly a quarter of our Department of Labor's team, and that's compared to 5.5% of the American workforce overall. And we depend on them for the unique skills, experiences, perspectives that they bring to our work, in the same way that Olita Crane that her colleagues were able to depend on her. At the Department of Labor, I say this all the time, we know that equity and excellence go hand in hand. As study after study confirms, diverse organizations are stronger, more innovative, better at problem solving. Diversity and excellence go together. And as we also know, the road to diversity isn't always smooth, but Olita Crane's story, her career, and her service, as well as the stories you're going to hear about today, are proof positive that America is safer and better when we recognize that our diversity is our strength. Today, many service members still return home to face enormous barriers to receiving the resources that they need, and those barriers are even greater for Black veterans. So we have more work to do, and that work has to be intentional in order to get Black veterans equitable access to the support they need and get them connected to the benefits that they've earned. And I know our Veterans Employment and Training Service, or VETS team, is leading that essential work. Together, we're building equity into everything we do as we help veterans transition and make sure that the valuable skills that they have developed during service turn into meaningful employment. And as we get them connected to career coaching, registered apprenticeships, and good family-sustaining jobs. So thank you for all that you are doing and continue to do, everyone here, especially our VETS team, to ensure that veterans return from service to the support and resources that they are owed. We are so excited to hear more about that with the amazing panel that we have here today. And now I'm going to turn it over to our incredible, first ever in history, Chief Diversity and Equity Officer, and my friend, Alacia Black Hackett. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Acting Secretary Sue. It's so important to hear her voice as she is such an advocate for the work around equity, accessibility, inclusive, and diversity. As she said, my name is Alacia Black Hackett, and I have the pleasure of serving as the inaugural Chief Diversity and Equity Officer here at the Department of Labor. For those needing an accessible description, I am a Black woman with long hair today, and I am wearing lime green. All right. Tomorrow I might have short hair. I use she, her pronouns. So here, commemorating the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces is such an important event in American history. The landmark executive order signed by Truman on July 26, 1948, not only ended racial segregation in the military, but also played a significant role in advancing equity and promoting diversity in our armed services. At the Department of Labor, we are committed to advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA, and improving the well-being of underserved, marginalized, and excluded communities. We all must recognize that by advancing racial equity, we improve working conditions and economic opportunities for all workers. By embedding diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility into our everyday lives, we address historical and systemic disadvantages that marginalized groups who have faced and continue to face such things as discrimination, bias, and unequal access to resources. Our push for DEIA at the Department of Labor creates more just and inclusive environment where everyone has equal opportunities to thrive and contribute their talents. As the Chief Diversity and Equity Officer, my office provides leadership and support for both the departmental external equity and internal DEIA priorities, alongside with strategic oversight of implementation of all White House equity executive orders. Through Executive Order 14035, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility in the Federal Workforce, we launched a whole-of-government approach to cultivate a federal workforce that draws from the full diversity of the nation, and we advance equitable employment opportunities. This executive order reaffirms the United States is at the strongest when our nation's workforce reflects the community it serves, and when our public servants are fully equipped to advance equitable outcomes for all American communities. Additionally, there is Executive Order 14091, which is further advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal workforce. Targets specific barriers still faced by underserved communities by requiring federal agencies to integrate equity into planning and decision-making. At the department, we are creating and implementing equity and DEIA programs at all levels of the government. We monitor our progress, we analyze data, we collect to see where we need to improve our efforts, but most importantly, we support employees. Our DEIA goals include securing a high-performing workforce drawn for all segments of American society to amplify diversity, cultivating a culture that encourages collaboration, flexibility, and fairness to enable individuals to contribute to their full potential, feel valued and supported, and institutionalize diversity and inclusion as a key strategic priority through continued leadership commitment, accountability, and total workforce engagement. It is critical that the Department of Labor lead the change in empowering the American worker and help them reach their goals. Through the department's Good Jobs Initiative, we emphasize the need to reach underserved communities by creating job opportunities free from obstacles, harassment, or discrimination. So what does an empowered American workforce look like? Through the Good Jobs Initiative, we provide workers with accessible information about their rights, including the right to bargain collectively and form a union. We engage with employer stakeholders as partners to improve job quality and workforce pathways to good jobs. We are supporting partnerships across federal agencies, and we are providing technical assistance on grants, contracts, and other investments intended to improve job quality. We see empowered veterans and DEIA in action through the programs and the initiative that VETS has in place. Through these programs, VETS is confronting barriers in they probably confirming too, but y'all can laugh, it's okay. VETS is confronting barriers to Black veterans' employment, ensuring equal access to education and career opportunities, investing in the recruitment and retention of Black veteran employees, and combating workplace discrimination. VETS programs advance inclusion in our underserved veteran communities and make equity real for Black veterans, not only by transitioning service members and their spouses to good jobs, but also with new programs in HBCU and minority-serving institution engagement initiatives, special programs to increase diversity in job applicants, outreach efforts to include underserved veterans. Most recently, the Veterans Employment and Training Services added 4 organizations to support the Employment Navigator and Partnership Pilot in an effort to help transitioning military members and their spouses. Further, VETS work in tandem with other agencies to address the employment and housing needs of Native Americans veterans living in tribal lands. VETS training programs such as the Register Apprenticeship support transitioning service members and veterans through educational programs that enhance the skills they gain during their military services. This training program prepares transitioning service members and veterans for jobs in high growth and emerging industries such as advanced manufacturing, IT, healthcare, and clean energy. Can we just pause to give them a hand for all of the work they do? When people with different backgrounds and viewpoints, especially those that have sacrificed so much for our country, come together, they bring unique ideas, experiences, and expertise to the table, leading to more effective and inclusive decision-making. By embracing diversity and equity in our workforce, we foster respect among individuals from various backgrounds and give employees a sense of belonging for all. DEIA and equity is vital for creating a fair and inclusive workforce. The anniversary of this momentous decision in the signing of Executive Order 9981 is an opportunity to remember. Don't forget to remember the progress made and to reflect on the ongoing efforts towards inclusivity and diversity in the military and every level of government. We value our veterans, My father is a veteran, so I value veterans. We uplift our Black veterans, and we honor our military as we celebrate all the advances made by our Black veterans that paved the way to diversity and inclusion in our armed forces. Now I will turn it back to my colleague, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Vets, Julian Purdy. Thank you so much.
All right, I promise this is my second to last time up here. So, Alacia said so many great things about our agency vets, but I just want to share with everybody what our mission is. And that's to enable that all veterans, service members, and military spouses can meet their full potential in the workplace with good, family-sustaining careers. One of the keys to achieving this mission is using evidence to identify and prioritize opportunities for improvement in supporting veterans' employment outcomes and their experiences in the workforce. VETS Black Veteran Research Project was conducted in collaboration with DOL's Chief Evaluation Office and is the starting point of a larger DEIA effort in understanding the variations in employment outcomes across different subgroups of veterans and building a strong knowledge base regarding underserved communities of veterans as are defined in Executive Order 13985, advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. By advancing equality, the federal government can support and empower all Americans, including the many communities in America that have been underserved, discriminated against, and adversely affected by persistent poverty and inequality. So it's only fitting that we roll out the preview of our findings and to facilitate a long overdue series of roundtable discussions on Black veteran employment and economic mobility around the 75th anniversary of both the Women's Armed Services Integration Act, signed into law by President Truman on June 12, 1948, and Executive Order 9981, the desegregation of the armed forces, signed by Harry Truman on July 26, 1948. And so, as we're doing this here in labor, I've gotten a lot of questions. Why is this happening in labor? Why in this specific place in the government? But as the acting secretary already said, there's many ties to labor, such as Alita Crane and how Black veterans are being supported by labor. But to truly answer that question, I want to take the longest route possible. So please bear with me for the next 25 minutes. So to truly understand the significance of this Executive Order 9981, we have to first go back and think about the global context leading up to and during 1948. It is estimated that before the U.S. declared war on Japan in World War II, fewer than 4,000 Black Americans were serving in the armed forces, and only 12 of those 4,000 were officers. However, by 1945, more than 1.2 million Black Americans were serving in uniform. And while the draft enlisted many of those Black service members, there are several records that also show how readily Black Americans volunteered to fight and serve their country despite the treatment they received at home. And so we also have to think that while these Black service members were serving, it was too often that they were attacked, lynched, maimed, and unjustly arrested when they also returned home from serving their country. And throughout World War II, Black Americans across the country and abroad participated in the Double V campaign, which was coined by the Pittsburgh Courier, a Black newspaper which called for victory over fascism abroad and victory over racism at home. And so we see that the 9th and 12th Cavalry Regiments, the 92nd and 93rd Infantry Divisions, the 761st Tank Battalion, Tuskegee Airmen, Montfort Marines, the 6th 888, and many others valiantly served abroad. Unions fought for employment access and rights for Black Americans at home. And one prime example lies with Asa Philip Randolph, the president of the Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car Porters, which is the first union led by an African American. Randolph and other organizers demanded of Franklin D. Roosevelt to prohibit job discrimination in the war industry. And so in response to overwhelming pressure, in June 25th of 1941, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, which declared there shall be no discrimination in the employment of workers in the war industry and the government because of race, creed, color, or national origin. So let's think about that. That was 1941. We had these protections for anti-discrimination. However, these did not last very long, unfortunately. And so this, in 1941, was also the first presidential directive on race since Reconstruction, and allowed Black Americans to enlist in all branches of the military and set up the Fair Employment Practice Committee to enforce new policies. Unfortunately, rather than comply with the Fair Employment Practice Committee's non-discrimination requirements, many state governments in the South refused federal war contracts. And in 1942, nearly 1 year after the creation of this committee, Black Americans comprised less than 3% of all workers in the war industries. And in June 1946, several Southern state senators effectively gutted this committee by eliminating its funding, and the committee ceased to function. So with strong support and urging from Randolph again, remember, he's a union leader and organizer, he organized a group that they called the League for Nonviolence Civil Disobedience Against Military Segregation. They persuaded President Truman to sign 9981, the desegregation of the armed forces, on July 26. This executive order set up the President's Committee on Equity of Treatment and Opportunity in the Armed Forces and called for full integration of the U.S. Armed Forces, which was not fully realized until 1954. While the executive order was a momentous step forward in the right direction, Black service members and veterans still continued to face undue adversity before and after their transition out of the military. So my colleagues already spoke about this, but I want to re-emphasize this, that many Black veterans were denied access to the Service Members Readjustment Act of 1944, which was later known as the GI Bill. And that provided veterans with an array of benefits, including low-cost mortgages, low-interest loans to start a business or a farm, 1 year of unemployment compensation, and dedicated payments of tuition and living expenses to attend high school, college, or vocational schools. The original GI Bill was one of the most wide-ranging set of social benefits ever offered by the federal government in a single comprehensive initiative, and is often credited with creating the American middle class. The extent of generational wealth developed from this important piece of legislation is incalculable, but also is the compounding opportunity cost for Black veterans and their families who were denied access to these critical benefits. So it's only fitting that 75 years later, and probably 75 years too late, we are here in the Department of Labor to follow in the footsteps of the former president of the Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car Porters to continue the fight for equal access, opportunities, and good jobs for Black veterans in the civilian labor force. And so today's event is going to be the first of 3 roundtables to discuss the highlight and key contributions of Black service members, provide a current snapshot of Black veterans in the civilian labor force, and discuss solutions for supporting Black veterans' transition and career success. And so without further ado, I would like to begin our panel discussion, which is going to be moderated by Yolanda Peacock, who is a research analyst for VETS. But before folks come to the stage, we are going to start off with another video from Congressman Sanford Bishop.
Greetings. I'm Congressman Sanford Bishop of Georgia's 2nd Congressional District and co-chair of the Congressional Military Family Caucus. I'm pleased to join you in celebrating the 75th anniversary of President Truman's Executive Order 9981, which desegregated the U.S. Armed Forces. Black Americans have been serving honorably and with distinction since America's war for independence up through our present conflicts. But while Black Americans fought against tyranny and fascism abroad, they suffered the indignity of racism and segregation here at home. we must continue to work towards achieving equitable representation for Black Americans at all levels of our country's military. I commend President Biden, Vice President Harris, Assistant Secretary Rodriguez, and the U.S. Department of Labor for hosting today's roundtable. By learning from the lived experiences of Black Americans who served in uniform and sacrificed for our nation, we can better serve them and achieve a more perfect union. Thank you, and Godspeed.
Thank you, Dr. Purdy, and thank you to Congressman Levin and Bishop for providing remarks for today's roundtable discussion. I am Yolanda Peacock, and I'm pleased, very pleased, to serve as moderator for today's roundtable discussion. Today, we intend to provide a current snapshot of Black service members and Black veterans in the civilian labor force. We plan to discuss solutions for supporting Black veterans, and before we get into the roundtable discussion, it's important to note that we're not going to cover or have the time to cover all the contributing factors that affect the Black veteran employment experience. We're just going to cover a few. It is also important to note that today's conversation does not serve as a profile for Black service members and Black veterans. So before I invite the panelists to introduce themselves, I'm going to provide a snapshot of Black service members and Black veterans. Black Americans are overrepresented in military service. Black military members are disproportionately discharged with statuses of other than honorable and general. Black transitioning service members and veterans access services at a higher rate than average. Black veterans report worse outcomes on a variety of socioeconomic factors when compared with white civilians and other veterans. Non-veterans overall had higher unemployment rates than veterans, but both Black civilians, non-veterans, and Black veterans had the highest unemployment rates among the subgroups included in the literature review. Now I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. We're going to go from left to right, starting with Ms. Patricia Jackson Kelly.
Good afternoon. My name is Patricia Jackson Kelly. I'm retired from the Army. I served in the Army, Air Force, Army, and Navy Reserves. I retired in 2003, as I said, as a lieutenant colonel. I am currently a member of the DAV, American Legion, and National Association of Black Military Women. I'm the immediate past president, also a life member of the American Legion, DAV, and the National Association of Black Military Women. I'm currently the commander for my American Legion post, Jackie Robinson.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Victor Lagrune. I am the former Chief Diversity Officer for the Department of Veterans Affairs. I also previously served as the chair for the Black Veterans Empowerment Council. Today, for the purpose of this conversation, I will serve as a veteran policy expert as well as equity expert as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Sharp. I'm the Director of Veterans Employment and Education for the American Legion, and I'm retired Army.
Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Ward. I'm a Vietnam-era veteran. I served in the United States Air Force Nurse Corps. I'm also the former director for the Center for Minority Veterans for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And today I'm representing the NAACP as one of their 3 vice chairs for their Armed Services and Veterans Affairs Committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Fallon Williams. I'm a 3rd generation Army who I served during Operation Iraqi Freedom. I did 10 years in the Army, and I bring you greetings from the DC Mayor's Office of Veteran Affairs, where I was appointed as the 4th LGBTQ Veterans Outreach and Relations Specialist. Thank you for having me.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Wynn. I'm, President, CEO of the VETS Group, Veterans Entrepreneurship Task Force as well. Also the Legislative Liaison for the National Association for Black Veterans. I'm an Air Force veteran. I'm stationed right here in Washington, D.C. We have a training facility right downtown here in D.C. and constantly working with veterans to see if we can get them gainfully employed. Thank you.
Thank you, panel. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Research conducted by the Department of Labor sub-agencies, VETS, and the Chief Evaluation Office has identified several factors contributing to differences in employment outcomes experienced by Black veterans. We will delve into a few of these with our panel to hear from them firsthand how they have seen these factors play out in their work, their research, and in their personal lives. We will also apply a solutions-oriented lens to discuss ways forward and best practices to support Black veterans' overall employment and career success. So the first topic that we're going to discuss today is veteran identity. And we're going to break this out into 3 sub-components: pre-enlistment factors, including socioeconomic status, locality and community, motivation for joining the armed forces, intersecting identities. The veteran identity has been identified as a contributing factor impacting the employment outcomes of Black veterans. Mr. LeGrune, Mr. Nguyen, and Mr. Sharp, could you begin by walking us through some of the pre-enlistment factors that play a role behind one's motivation for joining the armed forces and in the development of one's identity as a veteran, as well as how all of this can ultimately impact employment outcomes for Black veterans? Mr. LeGrune?
Thank you. First I want to start with what I consider to be one of the key elements of social determinants of outcomes, right? We often recruit African-American service members and Black veterans from underserved communities. And in doing so, when you're coming from a resource-poor environment, you serve in the military and return back to that environment, you're facing those same challenges that you left. You may face those same challenges as a person with disabilities when you return home, as many of our service members do. So as we start looking at the precursor to where we start seeing these disparities and deficits play out, we have to first look at where we concentrate our recruitment. That's the first key component. And then how we reintegrate our veterans back into society is the second element of that piece that we really have to dial into as we start looking at how we better shore up our service members, because when we don't, they start meeting these same deficits. They start coming back to the same elements. And without that additional support at the federal level and at the community level, we see a pattern of disparity that evolves itself.
Thank you, Mr. LeGrune. Mr. Nguyen?
Thank you. One of the things that I think about, first of all, let me just say that when we talk about Black veterans, or when I talk about Black veterans, I want to make sure it's a distinction that I can't qualify all Black veterans, okay? So I like to use the term some, or a few, or many, because nothing is the same for all Black veterans. But let me just say that in terms of the veteran identity coming into the military, one of the things that I'll just be quite clear about is that I think most of the folks that I've known didn't join the military for the thrill of the fight, to want to get in, nor did they want to get into the military simply because they wanted to identify with a win or a defeat. But joined the military because we wanted to get into some economic opportunities, some jobs, some skills, get out of the situation that we were in within the community, and be able to relate on a level that was different than what we were doing in the first place. Having come into the military, transitioning out, once you get out of the military, as Mr. LeGrune mentioned, going back to that community, you're able to retain your identity for a while, but then later on, if you don't work your way back out of that community, you reassociate back with that community and lose your veteran identity. I think that's a little bit different, though, for older veterans, because older veterans who've been in the military a long time, longer years, come back out, they've gained military rank, and so when they get back in the community, you often still remember and refer to them in the way that you did when they were in. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sharp.
Well, the goal of the American Legion and of our division was always to ensure that when veterans leave the military, that they're gainfully employed, that they're able to take care of themselves financially and also contribute to their communities. We are aware that many of our veterans that join the military coming from depressed areas around the country, and we definitely want to make sure that there's social mobility for them. So we want them to be able to, when they transition, be able to transition into that, in a world where they are gainfully employed and able to take care of themselves. Our focus has been always transition. We've always believed that once you join the military, you ought to be able to start planning your transition out to the civilian sector. We would like to see more veterans as they join the military also be made aware of what career paths they have while they're in the military, but also learn about their possible benefits and how they can improve themselves. So when they leave the military, that they're actually creating wealth for themselves and their communities.
Thank you. It is generally understood that the veteran identity and experience is not monolithic. Ms. Jackson Kelly, Ms. Ward, and Ms. Williams, could you share with us from either your professional or personal experience how intersecting identities can influence the fostering of different veteran identities, experiences, and outcomes? Ms. Jackson Kelly.
Yes, I can definitely speak on my personal experience. When I joined the military, when I went on active duty, I was 36 years old, which is not the norm. And I was assigned to a medical surgical unit at Travis Air Force Base. And the majority of my peers were young first and second lieutenants who the mean age was around 23 to 25. The head nurse's age was 30, around 30. So I found myself in a very unique situation. And I was basically the only nurse of color. So I had many factors that affected my progression in the military at that time. And as a result of that, I was led to seek out ways of learning on my own. So one of the things that we have to be mindful of is that environmental issues play a large part in people progression, especially in the military.
Thank you. Ms. Ward?
Most of my career is different from the other female veterans on the podium today. I joined the military and only stayed in for 2 years, so the majority of my experience has been in the civilian sector. So for 47 years, most of my experience has been in the civilian sector. And I guess what I'd like coming from the civilian sector for people to recognize that all Black veterans are not the same. We come from very different backgrounds. Yes, many of us come from depressed communities. We have social, economic issues. Many of us do not have those issues. When I joined the Air Force, I was already a nurse. I had already gone to college, a 4-year program, received my Bachelor of Science degree in nursing. So after my 2 years being in the military and getting out of the military, going into the civilian sector, I did not experience some of the difficulties that many other Black veterans experience because I had an education. I had chosen a career field where there was always a demand. As my mother would say, there will always be sick people. And so I think understanding that we come from different cultures, we have different value systems, and so we should be treated as individuals and not as a monolithic group that people think that this is a Black veteran. Here comes another Black veteran. From my many years of being in the civilian sector, I witnessed that if you had, especially a Black male veteran who had disability issues, and maybe they were mental, looking at him, you could not tell that, but once you hire that individual into a position, shortly after, there may be some behavior issues. And in the civilian sector, oftentimes people don't want to deal with that. They are very intolerant, very impatient. So I think one of the solutions from that perspective is to make sure that civilian companies and employers understand that these are veterans and they have served our country, and there are resources that they can be referred to assist them as opposed to terminating them, which is what oftentimes happens.
Thank you. Ms. Williams.
In 2016, when I got out, the first thing I wanted to do was not go back in the closet like I did my entire military career. And I was strategic about that because I knew moving back to Georgia, I would not necessarily have a support system, and I would not necessarily have the opportunities here. So I was very strategic about where I went, because when you look back at the data on Don't Ask, Don't Tell, over 14,000 were actually discharged from the military with a other than honorable discharge. And that creates a huge barrier on employment for LGBTQ plus individuals, period. And that alone is a huge thing. So as a Black LGBTQ veteran, you're looking at identities that not only am I Black, I'm LGBTQ plus. So when you look at identities, you look at how other things serve as barriers and determine. So just looking at one case that I'll say that really would be a solution is I have another LGBTQ veteran coordinator, and there was another spouse who felt who ran into a VSO, veteran service officer, who they didn't feel comfortable coming out to. There was some unconscious bias. And what they did was they reached out to me, and they was just like, could you please link me up with the veteran service officer I felt comfortable being around, sharing my status with health-wise. And with that being said, some of the solutions are actually finding individuals that those Black LGBTQ veterans trust and linking them up, which requires hiring of individuals as well too.
Thank you. So next we're going to move on to a different topic. We're going to talk about military experience and occupation. We're going to break this into 4 different subcomponents: discharge status, skills transferability, job mismatch, education, training, certification, and social capital. Research has shown that a service member's military occupation specialty, MLS, or its equivalent within other branches, while in the military, has considerable impact on their civilian employment potential and outcomes. Mr. Sharp, Mr. Nguyen, and Mr. Legrune, could you delve into this and tell us what the impact looks like, especially for Black veterans? We're going to start with Mr. Sharp.
Again, for us, we would like to see that when an individual comes into the military, finishes basic training, get to their first duty assignment, that they're given some sort of counseling in reference to a career path for that individual for that particular service. If an individual goes into combat arms or infantry, there are positive aspects of that particular field that they can use, due to leadership, training, those type things. But if they're also, again, looking to, when they transition out the military, look to see, well, what are the occupations that are more transferable in that particular military service that will assist that individual if they want to stay in the military as a career, and also start preparing for their transition out of the military, which could be, again, licensing, certification, going to a 4-year school, or starting their own business, or starting a farm.
Mr. Wood?
Thank you. Let me just say that for at least 20 years now, I've been a member of the National Association for Black Veterans. The organization itself was founded in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the 70s, as many members were coming back from Vietnam, and Black veterans were not being given their due service when they went to City Hall. And so they organized and came together as National Association for Black Veterans. The primary mission of that organization at that time not only was to advocate for the rights of black veterans, but also to end homelessness among black veterans and to also find a way to upgrade discharges of those veterans who came out with less than honorable discharges. Let me just say that with the impact of less than honorable discharges is tremendous. And there are so many, I don't know the exact number, of course, but there are so many blacks who've been impacted by that. You mentioned in your remarks, or Mr. Purdy did, about not having access to the GI Bill. When you get a less than honorable discharge, you don't have access to education benefits. And depending on how bad that discharge is, you may not have access to VA and some other things too. So to me, a less than honorable discharge should not be a life sentence. It lasts for life, and it should not last for life. If you did something, whatever it was, a disagreement you had with your commanding officer while you were in the military, 20 years ago, why should you still be held accountable for that incident that caused you that less than honorable discharge? It shouldn't be a life sentence. When veterans try to go, when we work with military veterans to try to get their discharges upgraded, most of the time it's denied. The overwhelming majority of the times that we try to get it upgraded is denied. So it turns out to be a life sentence. And then when we talk about employment outcomes, transferability of the MOS that you had while you were in the military, many black veterans did not have what we call high demand occupations in the military. And of course, this depends on what years you were talking about you were in. But most of them did not have a job, a military occupation that directly relates to what we call now high demand occupation. And so it's a challenge once you get out. And if you get out, even with an honorable discharge, it's a challenge trying to get the skills you need to get into the right career field. So, I just want to mention that in looking at ways to improve those outcomes, veteran service organizations can be a big support as people come out of the military. Thank you.
Thank you. Education, training, and certification prior to, during, and following the military service is also identified as an important factor that can determine outcomes for veterans in the civilian sector. Ms. Williams, Mr. Nguyen, and Ms. Ward, could you walk us through some of the implications for Black veterans? And we're going to start with Ms. Williams.
Well, I think the first thing is analyzing the systems where the veterans come from. I know as a Black veteran coming from rural Georgia, Upward Bound, and programs like that, that I had access to go on college tours and things like that. To take SATs was the first thing. So starting at the community things where we have opportunities to that. Second, while you're in the military, making sure that individuals know about green to go programs and things of that. And then when you get out, ensuring that Black veterans know about the colleges, that they go to colleges that will utilize their benefits to the best of their abilities versus being put into just one particular degree plan and not being suitable for you.
Mr. Nguyen?
Coming into the military, I think majority, it's easy to say majority of Black veterans don't have college degrees or advanced degrees. Having had an advanced degree or college degree prior to, you'd probably try to come in more than likely as an officer if you were qualified in that category. While you're in your time in service, it's not always easy to also find time to go to school in the evening while you're doing your duty during the day. Not to mention, if your duty ends up out there on the front lines, you're not going to nobody's school. Okay, so transitioning out, not having the college education, the skill level, your confidence level is going to be challenged when you come out. And again, as we just mentioned a few minutes ago, if you don't have the resources or the benefits to allow you to even go after that degree later on, it's even more challenging. One of the things, too, I wanted to mention is that we talk about transitioning service members, and oftentimes with the programs I work with, we think of transitioning service members with those that are coming out within the year or within less than 4 years, right? But we run into so many veterans who've been out 5, 10, 15 years. They're still out here. They still need support. They still need services. And so we try to connect them with resources that will provide them a more stable opportunity. But it's kind of segmented, quite frankly, throughout the communities, throughout the country. There's not a central resource that we can tap into, regardless of what state we're in, to find out what's available for us. And so some states are better than others. You have the American Job Centers who are across America, who are coordinated in some respects here with the Department of Labor, who do a good job of trying to provide a system wherein anybody, whether you're a vet or a non-vet, can go to a place for assistance with employment. However, we have found, too, that in looking at some of the data, disabled veterans are not being fully served through the job centers. When we look at the stats of those being placed in employment who are disabled veterans, it's very, very low. And so some improvements could be made there, obviously. Fortunately, we do have within that system the DVOP and the leavers, and I know some of you out there are familiar with that term, Disabled Veterans Outreach Program Specialists, leavers, who help to connect employers with the veterans who are coming through the system. These are very helpful and beneficial, and more of them are probably needed. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Ward?
Well, I think it's extremely important for Black veterans when they transition out of the military, be it that they decide to go to college. College is not for everyone. To obtain some type of skill, to go through a training program, to go through and get certificates or whatever. It makes a world of difference when you transition out, because oftentimes your veteran status in the civilian sector, people forget that you were a veteran. They don't really care that you're a veteran. It gives you a competitive edge in many situations. When you enter the civilian sector, even if you have a degree, oftentimes that's not enough. You may be qualified for positions and doors will continue to close in your face. If you get into a management job in civilian sector, most of the times you are an at-will employee. So if reduction in force takes place or an organization, corporate America, decides to downsize, oftentimes it's African Americans or Black veterans that are the first to go. And it doesn't matter about your performance. That's just the way it is. That's the reality that you are confronted with. So I think it's important, because if you end up being laid off, I went through 2 layoffs in my career, but because I had my credentials, a lot of doors closed in my face, but eventually I was successful in getting gainful employment. Then there are situations where you have your credentials and you have your degrees, you get into a position, you think, oh, well, then I'm going to apply for a management position. And this personally happened to me. I wanted to get into nursing management. So I was told, you have a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing, you have to have a master's degree for us to even consider you. So then I decided, and it was really difficult because at the time I had gone through a divorce and I was a single parent working a full-time job. I worked a full-time job. I used my GI Bill. I worked never missed a day of work. I took care of my daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, and I went and got my master's degree. I thought, yes, this is it. So then I started applying for management positions. So now it's not my degree anymore. It's that we can't consider you because you don't have experience. You don't have management experience. So we cannot consider you for this position. So I made a very tough decision to take a $10,000 pay cut, being a single parent at the time, because I saw this was dead end and I was never going to advance in this particular organization. So those are the type things that you face, but what always helped me to advance in spite of those difficult times was the fact that I had my education. So I can't put enough emphasis on that, especially for Black veterans. If you don't have your degree, get certificates, go and get some type of skill set to have that competitive edge, because it makes a difference in your future.
Thank you. That's a great segue to the next topic. We're going to talk about gainful employment. And we're going to break this out into job versus career, placement, retention, and advancement, earning potential, and entrepreneurship. Although some research may reveal positive indicators regarding Black veteran employment outcomes, a deeper and more personal look may tell us a different story in terms of Black veterans finding gainful employment in the civilian labor force. Mr. LeGrune, Ms. Ward, and Mr. Nguyen, could you please share with us how you have found this to be a case from your personal experience or within your area of work? And we're going to start with Mr. LeGrune.
Thank you. So as we start looking at where these challenges originate, right, I would also go back to recruitment. If you are recruited from a certain area where you may have underperforming schools within your environment, if you are recruited by recruiters who say, hey, I've got to get these numbers and these MOSs, quite often you will find yourself in a role in the military that probably does not suit your skill set or does not suit your future ability. Quite frankly, if you don't have the ability to convert what you've learned in the military into the civilian sector, let's say if you were a welder in the Navy, but you go back to somewhere like Detroit and there's no opportunities for welders. Now you have to reskill, you have to retool again. And that will put you further behind your peer group as you look to compete in the workplace. So what I've found in places like Chicago and Detroit and Baltimore and Boston and many other places where there's density of the population, veterans are in a competition, not just with one another, but with their civilian counterparts. And if you're competing with the number of people for the same job, and you're also coming back and having to face bias and stigma where someone might say, well, I don't want to hire someone like this because you might have PTSD, right? They won't say it out loud, but it plays out in the process. I don't want to have the liability, if you will. And I've had HR managers come to me and ask, what do I do if I see an applicant and I'm not certain about their disability and if we can meet their needs? I remind them about one, what does the federal law say, right? What does the local law say? And what is the best practice? Because you want the most out of everyone that you can bring into your workforce. But much of this is the level of bias that veterans face, whether they be Black veterans, male or female, or from other communities, as they come out to work their way and reintegrate themselves back into the workforce. So while I've seen around the country, many veterans do come home, and they do find success, they reintegrate, they find family and community and so on. Unfortunately, many of our veterans come back and do find some level of struggle and need the level of hurdle help to remove these barriers to gainful employment. Because you will take a job when you get home to feed your family. That job will find you often in a job position versus a career opportunity. And when you're in a job, you're not going to excel the same way you would within a career opportunity. So making certain that we have veterans in positions where they're seeking careers and getting career opportunities really does make a difference in their outcomes.
Thank you. Ms. Ward?
I'd like to go back to talking about education and gainful employment from the perspective that my personal experience and observation working in the civilian sector, a lot of Black veterans are able to get gainful employment. It just depends on how you want to define gainful employment. Does it mean that I get a job and I'm making $20,000 a year? It's gainful employment. Or I'm educated and I get a job and I'm making $60,000, $80,000 a year. Many of the veterans that I have seen, when they do get jobs classified as gainful employment, they end up being placed in low-paying jobs, dead-end jobs, where they don't have the opportunity to advance into higher pay grades. And so that ends up being a major barrier when you think in terms of taking care of your family. And this is not just for veterans that don't have education. I'm talking about, I have seen veterans that have had impeccable qualifications. They have been in a system, they performed outstandingly in their job, great performance reviews. They are referred to the hiring authority, and they're trying to get promotions because promotions make a difference in your wages. And you ask the question, is it that you don't have enough Black veterans that are qualified that are applying for these jobs to make a difference in their quality of life? And the answer is no. We're very pleased with the pool of qualified applicants. It's just that the hiring authority chose to hire someone that they were more comfortable with, people that looked like them, or someone referred them. It's someone's friend that may not be near as qualified. So I would really like to see more efforts put toward when Black veterans apply for jobs, that companies put forth a greater effort to eliminate disparities from that standpoint, to make sure when you talk about gainful employment, if I'm a single mother and I have a child, I want my child to go to the best schools like everybody else wants their kids to go to the best schools. I want to live in the best neighborhoods like everybody else wants to live in the best neighborhoods. I was able to do that as a single parent, but many Black women veterans that end up being single parents, when they enter the workplace, yes, they can get gainful employment, but it's not the type jobs where they're going to be able to afford a good quality of life for them and their children.
Thank you. Mr. Nguyen?
We started off this conversation recognizing the 75th anniversary of desegregation of the armed services. And that executive order had to be put out there because they were separate, even fighting the same battles even after the war was over. And with many pieces of legislation, civil rights legislation and so forth, once the legislation is put out there, everybody doesn't abide by it. So, even though it's the law of the land, segments of our nation don't always comply. Or it may take time for some segments to comply. This thing is very, very complicated to really kind of get into, but let me just say that, and I like the fact of one of the points Ms. Ward made, we have many outstanding Black veterans who are doing well, who have done well. Okay, so, I know some of my comments, I'm focusing on those that are dealing with challenges, barriers to employment, multiple barriers, economic disadvantages, criminal records, incarceration, okay, homelessness. How you going to get a job when you're homeless? You don't have an address to put on the application, right? So we have to, unfortunately, we do have some programs that are helping us and helping Black veterans to address many of those issues, but it's an ongoing challenge. And one of the things nobody has mentioned, I guess I don't even know if I should mention it, but we do have racism in America. Okay, it still exists. And so, you can have two veterans of equal value go to the same job site and apply, and the Black veteran don't get the job simply because of their race. I mean, let's face it, it still exists. But we got to do what we got to do to try to overcome these type of challenges in America. And fortunately, back in 2008, 2009, when we had the economic crisis during that time, a couple of us came together and we formed the Vets Group and set up an IT training academy to help particularly black veterans to get into high demand occupations and to be able to get certifications like she talked about, not just college degrees, but certifications that will qualify them for these high demand jobs in the IT industry. And it's been working. It's been working. We're seeing more and more veterans becoming successful, having gotten those certifications, but it's not without help. They've got to have the support system to even get through the program, stay focused, get the certification, and then go on to get that job. Thanks.
Thank you. Obtaining gainful employment is but only one part of the story. Pathways to career advancement and earnings that appropriately match the level of the role and work are also important aspects of the employment landscape. Mr. Sharp, could you walk us through these additional components from the Black veteran perspective?
You know, we visit various military installations around the country every year, and we look at the transition program and the resources that are available for veterans as they transition out. The current programs in many of your installations are very impressive. They assist veterans with employment. They talk about the various programs the Department of Labor has, the Navigator program, SBA's programs, VA, the VECTAC program, VRAP, all these programs exist. You have various pathways, you know, if you want to go the entrepreneur route, SBA is there. If you want to work for VA, VA is there at these installations. The issue is for black veterans, if they're going to improve the economic outcomes, they have to take advantage of the resources that are already there. And in order to be able to do that and learn of the resources and the various programs the federal agencies have and the private sector has, they have to be allowed to take full advantage of those programs. That's currently not happening. And a lot of it is due to commanders' input. They're not allowing these individuals to get to these programs to take advantage of what's out there in a timely fashion. We were involved in a mega job fair at Fort Hood, Texas just a month ago. We had individuals coming up to us saying that they had just returned from a major training exercise in Louisiana. Okay, so when we asked them, okay, what are you doing for employment? What are you doing for transition? Do you know your benefits? How much time you have left? We were told 2 weeks. Okay, we had other individuals we spoke to. We asked, well, what are your plans? Oh, well, we have 9 months left, so we have plenty of time to transition out. Well, do you plan to apply for a federal job? Of course. Well, you know it takes a year for them to even get back to you. So you're already too late. We really believe that there should be a hybrid in-person transition program, again, for individuals to start learning about their benefits and where they plan to live and what they plan to do prior to them having two weeks left. Even though they say you know, we're giving folks a year to start planning their transition, that's not happening in many cases. And if you're a black veteran from a depressed area, if you're not being encouraged to take advantage or allowed to take advantage of the programs that currently exist, then your transition is going to be that much harder. Even those individuals that are going to colleges and they're doing fairly well, they could be better off if they had known about what programs currently exist. The American Legion, when the original GI Bill was passed back in the 40s, it was for all veterans, and that included black veterans. Now, the post-9/11 GI Bill, the American Legion also pushed that as well. But there's a lot of feedback coming back saying that the post-9/11 GI Bill is a failure because we have too many individuals going to institutions of higher learning that do not provide quality programs that lead to gainful employment. I'm originally from Chicago. I usually get a Chicago paper every week, and there were a couple of huge articles that talked about that 85% of minorities in Chicago who are in institutions of higher learning, who are black and brown, are coming out not either finishing the program, not being gainfully employed, or going into debt because the programs were for-profit institutions, and it was, if those individuals would have been better off if they hadn't gone to college at all. So again, you know, these are things that our veterans need to know prior to them departing the military, and they should learn what's available as soon as possible. When you look at the VA program, you have individuals that may want to buy a home, but the current 1 day, 6 hour program, the home loan program is 45 minutes. Now, if you live in a high cost area and you have to compete with the private sector, in some cases, the VA home loan program is not the best for you. Conventional loan is better. But you're going to have to save $20,000 to $30,000 to be able to do that. You can't do that in 2 weeks. So again, it's really important. If blacks are going to do a lot better, then they need to be allowed to take advantage of these programs on these installations a lot earlier.
Okay, thank you. There are various support systems and services currently in place for transitioning service members and veterans, but more can always be done and better to serve Black veterans in particular. Ms. Jackson Kelly, Mr. LeGrune, and Ms. Williams, could you share what these transition programs and services, as well as the individuals behind them, need to know and are due in order to better facilitate and support successful employment outcomes for Black transitioning service members and veterans? Ms. Jackson Kelly?
One of the major programs that they have is the TAP program, which is the Transition Assistance Program. When I was in the military, I was not aware of that once I got out. It has improved tremendously over the years because I also worked at the VA hospital, so some of the veterans that came in, they discussed it. We have many programs. And as the acting secretary discussed, the Department of Labor has a program that that you receive assistance from. The American Legion, the DAV, we have the various service organizations. We also have the Military Officers Association. They have a segment where they assist veterans that are returning. The only issue is I don't think that they realize, a lot of people fail to realize that women are different. Women have unique needs when they are being discharged. A lot of times people are focusing on employment, and we are focusing on how we're going to take care of our family and how we are integrating back into society. And I think that that is one of the major things that is missed. And the other thing is, when we were referred to the VA hospital, a lot of us have experienced sexual trauma and sexual harassment. So when we return to that environment, it resurfaces. So the women, we have a tendency to stay away and we isolate ourselves. So as a result of that, you find a lot of medical issues, mental health issues, suicide rate increase. So I think that we need to focus more on the fact that women do have unique needs when they are being discharged.
Thank you. Ms. Williams?
I think the first thing would be to address the fact that when you're transitioning is to look at the benefits that we definitely earned. Veteran service officers do exist. You can reach out to them prior to you being discharged. What really helped me was I was blessed to be part of a fellowship called Dog Tag Bakery. And when analyzing that program, it didn't necessarily try to force me to be a part of a employment cycle, but it looked at me from a holistic perspective. There were so many things looked at as far as like teaching me how to start my own business, but not only that, they partner with Georgetown University. So you not only leave the fellowship with that hands-on knowledge and capabilities and holistic perspective, but a certificate of business administration from a huge universities such as Georgetown. And one of the things that I would say that has really allowed them to excel is partnering with different organizations like Deloitte to assess the program. And they have always grown, and they never left me behind. If I needed anything such as, do I need advice on where to go for a divorce lawyer? And anything like that, they were always there, because after leaving the military, whether you get on a med board, every veteran has a different facet or relatively of how they see and view the military itself. So everyone doesn't necessarily come back with this positive, I can go to the military for everyone. That community of trust needs to be formed. And what I've seen through Dog Tag is my community was built through them when I came out. So looking at, yes, employment is amazing, but what about the whole veteran as well too? And what programs do you have exist, such as these fellowships, such as these apprenticeships, but are you assessing then the whole entire veteran versus just giving them a job right in front of them?
Thank you. Mr. LeGrue, will you close out this topic, please?
Yes. One of the things that I've often found to be an enormous challenge is that when our veterans come back to community, it falls on the community to make them whole. The federal government does not exist at the local level. The resources are there, but our veterans have to be connected to those resources. Their families have to be tied in to that network of services. And it's not about what you need, it's can you get access to it when you need it? Because the minute you need one thing, you often need several things. And if you're not going to get access to what you need when you need it, often our veterans become destitute and desperate, right? And then we see another slew of issues. So what we would love to see at the community level is a stronger, more robust relationship between our federal agencies that have taken on the ownership of making our veterans whole, be more intertwined and connected at the community level with the community organizations and the nonprofits who actually do some of this heavy lifting. Because when our veterans come home and they need some support, the community is going to reach out, right? So whether it's a faith-based population, our nonprofits, our municipalities, with our offices of Veterans Affairs, if those organizations are not connected well with HUD and HHS and the VA and labor and many others, how are our veterans going to know where to get what they need? Because when you go through TAPS, and all of us went through TAPS, I went through 06, 07, I was thinking about everything else I had in front of me. So I was a bunch of 800 numbers and some copies of forms, and bring this with you and keep this in case you need it, and you might need this one day. 6 months later, you don't know where any of that paperwork is. So what you're doing is veterans are calling other veterans to find out how to find the thing that they need to get to a thing that they got to get to take care of their families, right? The better way that it's worked in other communities is where an organization has a liaison that they partner with at labor. They can say, hey, we've got these programs you can take advantage of. This is a number of the person that you can reach who will make certain they walk you through the program you get access to. If that's replicated throughout the federal government, you'll see higher utilization of benefits, but also more efficient utilization. Because if one veteran needs one thing, they're gonna go several places to get that one thing. So now 5 agencies in one community is trying to help that one family, right? And everyone's not going to be able to do it because they're pulling resources from somewhere else to meet that need. So the better way for us to get this work done at the community level, where the veteran really exists, is if the DOJ is discharging someone from Veterans Court, who's going to be there to receive that veteran? Who's going to make sure they're stably housed, gainfully employed, supported mental and behavioral health, right? All of those different agencies that line up those services, how do we ensure that they're better connected at the community level? Because we know they exist up here, but there's such a huge gap between that and the impact zone that we've got to shore up that work so that underserved communities don't feel disadvantaged when they seek out support. When our female veterans really need the help they need, we also have to have more female veteran service officers. We have to have more service officers of color, because I need to talk to someone about an experience I had that they may not be able to relate to. And they may not do their best effort to make sure when I file that claim that they're articulating what really happened for me. So I need someone that I can trust, that I can go to, that can speak to me and my needs and concerns. So that's part of how we better support the transition piece of this, because putting it all on TAPS is, I think, somewhat ill-fated, because you're asking TAPS to do a whole lot for a duration of time, right? You're going to be a veteran forever. You're a service member for this window of time, whatever that window looks like. So we're going to be supporting veterans all the way into the very end, right? We need to be more thoughtful about how people utilize, gain access, and really take full advantage of these benefits that help them live more robust lives.
Thank you. Thank you, panel, so much for supporting this roundtable discussion. Thank you for sharing your personal stories, and thank you for your time and the work that you do. Now I'm going to turn it over to Das Purdy for closing remarks.
So I just want to quickly, again, thank the panel for that robust conversation about their experiences and some insight into the Black veteran community. I really appreciate that. And also like to thank Yolanda Peacock for moderating the panel. The conversation really focused on the Black veteran experience today, but I think a lot of the concerns that were raised really resonate across multiple underserved communities in the veteran population. And so as we're doing this work, we are going to take the solutions that we are ascertaining from this panel, the second and third panel, which is on the 27th and the 31st. So that is my plug for y'all to tune in virtually. The link is on the Eventbrite. To really get a better understanding of how we can better serve all underserved communities. Some of the key things that I jotted down from just listening to this panel is, as we are dealing with veterans, we have to remember that they are also people. They have needs outside of just getting a job. And so we have to provide wraparound services for folks as we are supporting them looking for these jobs. And the American Job Centers across the nations actually do this. And unfortunately, we need to spread the word for that. We need to make sure folks understand what resources exist and make sure the community knows so that they can reach their full potential in the workplace. Also, I want to just quickly note that the other thing that folks pointed out was how we could connect federal resources to the local community. We talked about some of the Good Jobs initiatives earlier with the Lacey Black Hackett, but also what we're doing right now with our department is having a Good Jobs Great City initiative, where we are touching base with local communities and building partnerships and providing technical assistance to show them how our dollars can be effective for their local populations. So we will continue that great work as it's been echoed here on the stage that is much needed. And also I want to say that as folks are looking for resources in the communities, that we do have regional contacts for DOL vets on our website. So folks can go to that website, they can reach out to our folks. There are phone numbers and email addresses listed for employees who are located around the country. And last but certainly not least, I wanted to mention the Employment Navigator and Partnership Pilot. One thing I heard on the stage was, how do we ensure that folks are getting a warm handover to resources and those who continue to provide support after they have transitioned? As Mr. Wynn said, the transition often can last 1 year, 4 years, or 15 years. Sometimes it takes a little while for us to really get on our feet after we leave the military. And so through the Employment Navigator and Partnership Pilot, we are providing those warm handovers to organizations who are supporting veterans after they depart service and leave that gate. And that's something that we are striving to continue to increase and grow, but also with anything in the world, constraints and resources is always an issue. So again, I thank everybody for tuning in. I look forward to seeing everybody on the 27th and 31st for our second and third part of this Black Veterans Roundtable, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.